You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob, it's bully
Inside the Village for the week of November the 29th. Can you believe that?
It's crazy.
2023. It's almost December. Christmas is almost here.
Ho, ho, ho.
Are you a fan?
I don't mind Christmas.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Not a fan of the snow, though.
No, man, it's early up here, too.
Oh, man. It is just, it's crazy. I mean, one day it's green, next day, just, it's like a Christmas card.
I know. And as you know, I'm kind of half disabled. I walk with a cane, so when I stare out the window and all this snow, I feel like I'm 80 years old and I can't. I'm like, I guess I can't go outside there. Like yesterday, I worked at home. It was pounding the snow yesterday.
Yeah.
I looked at the window. The snow's blowing. I'm like, nah. I hadn't put those things on my boots yet. You know, the
spike things?
The spikes you put on the body of boots. My cane has a spike, which I like to have.
Does it really?
Yeah, you can flip it down. It's come in handy, Scott.
Oh, that's pro level.
Yes. So I made it here today, though.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Inside the Village. Derek Turner, executive producer, is here. Michael Friscolanti, of course, editor-in-chief. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Big show today, fellas. We're going to discuss dementia. And this actual interview kind of stemmed from an article that we ran a few weeks back.
Yeah, this is a good time to plug Village Life,
Absolutely.
Our section of our site dedicated to living your best life.
Yes.
A lot of interesting stories about real estate, about festivals, but also about medical issues. And there was a story up there from The Conversation, which is kind of like a journal for experts, medical experts,
right.
Academics. And it's more to publish articles that the average Joe can understand.
Yep.
They're not necessarily published in the New England Medical Journal or something like that.
Layman's terms.
Yes. Right? So there was a piece by a PhD candidate in Calgary named Daniella Vellone who wrote about dementia and sort of the indicators, behavioral indicators of potential dementia. And it was just one of those stories that resonated with people because it was just basically, here are 5 things to look for in your loved ones, 50 and older, that you might want to, if you start to notice these things, it could be the early signs of dementia. And a lot of people read it. It was very interesting to people. They obviously have elderly loved ones that they're looking after, that they're keeping a close eye on. And so we decided to invite Danielle on to the show.
It's going to be a great conversation. And side note, and I'm going to bring this up to Daniela and the doctor when they join us shortly. I just went through a sleep study a few weeks ago because allegedly I snore. So I had to go and get tested. Turns out I have sleep apnea, and sleep apnea can be a main contributor to early onset dementia.
Yeah, that's true. I have sleep apnea as well.
Do you?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Do you sleep with the mask?
Well, I just got fitted.
We've just given our listeners and viewers a horrible thing.
Try and unsee that.
Think about, good luck.
Can you imagine the two of us in a room together? Road trip? 2 CPAP machines?
Oh, it'd be terrible. It's half the luggage.
Oh, man.
That's crazy.
But I also found out it doesn't count as a carry-on when you're flying.
It doesn't?
It does not, because it is a medical device.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, have you flown with it yet?
I haven't. I haven't gotten it.
I
literally just got fitted yesterday.
Do you wear it on the plane?
Can you imagine?
Could you take a nap on the plane?
Fire up this machine, this big hose.
What were we talking about? We were talking about something important, weren't we?
We were talking about our guest and dementia.
Yeah, so it'll be a fascinating conversation, I think. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's roll into the first word to Frisco. Lots of stuff to cover this week. Let's start in Sault Ste. Marie, where volunteer firefighters were sent to the hospital during a training exercise.
Yeah, this was a crazy story. James Hopkins chased this down for us. We came from a tip to the newsroom about some volunteer firefighters in the area around Sault Ste. Marie were doing some training in the Goulet River, water rescue training of some kind. Right. And it turns out 4 of the people had to be sent to hospital for potential hypothermia. The company that does these courses now has stopped all the courses while the Ministry of Labor is investigating, while the Office of the Fire Marshal is investigating. Kind of scary stuff, like we hear about these kind of training exercises all the time, obviously, that police and fire services will go through.
Right.
And it was pretty nerve-wracking there for a little while. It seems like everybody's okay. But obviously some outstanding questions about what happened, so we'll continue to follow that.
And you got to think when you sign up as a volunteer, you're wondering, is this what I signed up for? But it gives you real perspective as to what goes on a day in the life of.
Absolutely.
Okay, talking about snow and the Christmas and holiday season just around the corner. Is it just me, or does it seem like this year the need everywhere you look across our footprint, across the province and beyond, seems to be even greater this year.
You do feel that way, right? We've obviously spent the year talking about inflation and the cost of living, and the huge increases at the grocery store and people's rent, and the organizations that help people all year long, especially at Christmas time, where it becomes more of a light shone on them. Organizations like the Salvation Army and food banks are reporting in all our communities that the need has never been this high, right? I think, and there's been some research that has come out too, right? I think an organization put out a study this week talking about how food bank usage in Ontario is up 38% from last year. And I think I read somewhere up 100% since 3 or 4 years ago. Just way more people who are not able to get by depending on these organizations to eat. Mm-hmm. Joe McGinty in Cambridge had a story about a Facebook moms group that puts together baskets of stuff for over the holidays for families, and they couldn't do anymore because the demand was so high. They couldn't accept any more people to help. But Joe's story kind of triggered some people to come through and donate some items and some money to make sure that they could fill these hampers for some more people. So that's some positive things that we can do. That we tell these kind of stories, but it's everywhere, Scott. You see it at the local Christmas cheers, at the food banks, organizations asking for volunteers, for help. I know, just sticking with the Sioux again, St. Vincent Place here around the corner, men's shelter and food bank, as well as a thrift store. They put out a call to all local politicians to come and volunteer here for a day, right? And we did have the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie here a couple weeks ago, and he took up the challenge. He called them, and he said he was going to come by and do some volunteer work there and get a closer look of how things are going. It's just, I think about what we do at Village here too. At Sioux today, we're going to start our 12 Days of Christmas campaign with Jasmine Rowley, who does that every year. Giving some positive vibes to people in the community. And it's just, it's an opportunity to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and say, what can we do? What can we do better? We've done tried to do things as a company, but what can we do as individuals? Because it is a rough time for sure.
Certainly is well said. Okay, let's head to Burlington, home of Burlington today, and a really cool series that we've started there.
Yeah, I hope our readers in Burlington, I know a lot of them have seen it. It's called This is Burlington. And it was just, we were brainstorming some ideas, and we decided to just tell some stories about what makes that community such a great place to live. So it's stories about people, about places in the community, about businesses in the city of Burlington that just kind of make it great. They're synonymous with the city, right? So there's been stories about, the crossing guard who's been doing it for feels like hundreds of years. There's a story about this hill in Burlington where people think if they're driving up, they're actually going down. Like they call it Magnetic Hill. It feels like you're being pulled up the hill.
Right,
it's very strange, right? Stories about restaurants that have been around for a long time. And they're coming out every afternoon all through the month of November with the tag, This is Burlington. And I was talking to Brenda Jeffries, our editor there, and she's been putting this together with her team there with Julie Slack and Chris Arnold, 2 reporters, great reporters there. And she's just so happy with how it's gone, right? People are talking about it around the city. They're sending her messages. They're emailing her, telling her, I love these stories. And they're suggesting other stories. And we can really see this as being something that we do on a regular basis. And what was great for me is that we sat down with the team there and just brainstormed for a long time. Just what are some positive stories? And we cover so much negativity.
Yeah.
Like it's part of the business. We cover bad things, terrible things. It's part of being a journalist. This was a moment to just say, what's great? What's great here? And we thought, there's this referee who's been refereeing in the hockey ring forever. Everyone knows who he is. The league wouldn't run without him. And just stories like that. And I got to tell you, I left and I told Mike Purvis, managing editor here, just how awesome I felt after that meeting, because it was just nice to talk about positive stories and to see it come together. We're in the last week of it. There's only a few more days left of the series. It's been great. I'm really proud of the team there, and I think our readers have enjoyed it.
All right, good stuff. Burlington today. Check it out. Okay, when Inside the Village returns, we're going to be joined by Daniella Vellone and Dr. Zainor Ismail, a doctor at the University of Calgary, and we're going to talk dementia when Inside the Village returns right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village alongside Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Very pleased to be joined this afternoon by Daniella Vellone, a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary, and Dr. Zainor Ismail, a doctor at the University of Calgary. Good of you both to join us. Welcome to Inside the Village.
Thanks for having us.
Daniella, if we can, I'd like to start with you. What motivated you to write the piece that you did on dementia for the conversation?
Yeah, so I think it was a few factors. So partly because I've been touched by lived experience. So my grandma had dementia before she passed away for 10 years. And I think that was a large motivating factor. But also, I just think that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware that dementia encompasses more than just factors around memory and thinking. And so I think that by exposing just different areas that people can become familiar with, so like behaviors, that can also allow for people to be familiar and be able to look for those in family members or in friends, and potentially see a doctor earlier than when the dementia basically onsets.
It's interesting because you mentioned the point that a lot of people who don't know a lot about dementia associate it with memory loss or issues with memory. But what your piece really explores is that there's some key behavioral things we can be looking out for in loved ones over the age of 50 that might be signs of potential dementia down the road. Is this a well-researched thing, Daniella? Is this something that's been out there? I guess it's an obvious question, but is this information that the experts know already?
Yeah, so I would say that it's definitely one of the newer kind of fields. I would say neuropsychiatric symptoms are much newer than cognitive symptoms in terms of being looked at and explored. In terms of the context that I look at neuropsychiatric symptoms in, so mild behavioral impairment, this is very recent. And my supervisor is actually one of the leading, he's one of the leading members, and even in terms of creating the mild behavioral impairment checklist, which is a checklist that explores these emergent and persistent symptoms in older adults. Dr. Ismail, I don't know if you maybe want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I can. So we're coming full circle. 115 years ago, Dr. Alzheimer, Elvis Alzheimer, did an autopsy on a woman, Auguste D., who presented to the hospital not with cognitive symptoms, but with emotional dysregulation and some suspiciousness. And then the cognitive impairment declared itself and she progressed and died. And that was the first case, of Alzheimer's disease as it's now conceptualized. Then we spent 100 years really thinking about cognitive symptoms, especially memory of events and episodes. And then in 2016, we published criteria for mild behavioral impairment, which emphasized the fact that in 30% of people who go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, they actually develop behavioral symptoms before cognitive ones. So 70% get the changes in cognition behavior concurrently, or the cognitive changes first and the behavior after. But in 30%, the initial manifestation is a behavioral change. And that's what we're trying to leverage for early detection, is to properly measure, identify, classify those early behavioral changes.
Thank you for that, Doctor. I want to get into some of the examples of those changes. I guess the dumb question, the obvious question for the person who doesn't study this is, why is that important that you were able to figure out that there were some behavioral issues involved in this as well?
So the reason that behavior is so important to look at is because these symptoms can actually arise before cognitive symptoms even start to emerge. Mm-hmm. And so if we can look at these behaviors either individually or all together, so using all 5 of those mild behavioral domains that were mentioned within the paper, we can potentially, identify these people earlier. And so kind of the point there is that if we're able to treat these symptoms, or if we know that these people are at greater risk for dementia anyways, then perhaps we can implement interventions much earlier than when we would be able to implement them because of cognitive symptoms down the road. So that's kind of the principle of why we're looking at these behavioral symptoms.
I think one of the reasons why the piece resonated with so many people is because it was almost like a how-to guide, right? It explained, here are the 5 things that you can look for in people 50 and over that could be a sign of something. So can we go through each one? Is that okay, and talk about them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the first one on your list is apathy. Talk about what that is, and obviously we know what that is, but what should people be looking for?
Yeah, so this is actually the domain that I study within my own research. So I'm pretty familiar with it. So apathy is a lack of interest. So there's kind of in the literature, the way that it's been explained is there's different domains of apathy, and the MBIC really does capture that. That's the checklist for MBI. So there's different domains. There's a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional domain. The cognitive domain is based on like interest. So has the person lost interest in their family, friends? And it also encompasses like, does this person lack curiosity? The behavioral domain is more about initiative. So have they become less spontaneous and active? Are they less likely to initiate or maintain conversation? Have they lost motivation to act on obligations? And then the last domain of apathy is that emotional dysregulation. So are they less affectionate? Do they seem indifferent? And do they seem like they no longer care about anything? So those are kind of the different domains of apathy and what apathy is about.
So what about sadness or mood instability?
First of all, apathy can often look like depression and can be misdiagnosed as depression because people are less engaged with the world around them. But the mood and anxiety symptoms that we see in mild behavioral impairment look also just like depression. And overall, there is this historical this historical approach that these later life onset conditions would possibly be given psychiatric diagnoses and treated with psychiatric medicines, and people would not consider perhaps an aging and degenerating brain. So the mood and anxiety symptoms are actually the most common of the 5 domains and often end up being treated and identified in primary care offices or even in specialty offices. And the mood and anxiety symptoms are often, it's actually a great amount of worry about general things. And the mood symptoms it can be mood instability, it can be sadness, it can be withdrawal. You tend not to see the hopelessness and tearfulness that you might in, say, major depression, but on face, it looks fairly similar. And so if we were to target from a public health perspective, the symptoms that can most be missed, it would be the mood and anxiety symptoms.
That's fascinating. The third one is lack of impulse control. And when I read about this one, I can picture some relatives as they got older having these kind of symptoms, frustration, aggressiveness, agitation. Who's best to speak to this one?
Dr. Ismail, I think, yeah.
I am, yeah. So, in Alzheimer's disease, 40-50% of people will have agitation at some time over the course of their illness. But what we realize now is these changes can emerge in advance of dementia at the mild cognitive impairment stage, or even when people have normal cognition. And it's often normalized. Someone's aging, you get the grumpy old man kind of, label. But indeed, these can be behavioral changes that are secondary to underlying disease changes as well. So people can be impulsive or impatient, or get really their frustration tolerance can be really poor. They can blurt out things. They don't want to wait their turn in line necessarily, and they're just more temperamental, and they can fly off the handle a bit more. There's another kind of subdomain, a cluster of symptoms within this domain that involve kind of hoarding type behaviors or repetitive behaviors and compulsions, and can sometimes be misdiagnosed as obsessive compulsive disorder. And those are less frequent, but very important to identify if they emerge and persist in later life.
Let's talk about the fourth item, social inappropriateness.
Yeah. So with social inappropriateness, this is where somebody who might not necessarily have or abide by like social norms. So they might lack social grace or empathy. They just become less concerned about how their words might affect other people, or talk openly about very personal things that they wouldn't normally talk about. So they might also lack judgment. And they might talk to a person who's a stranger as if they're familiar. So these are kind of the symptoms that somebody who is socially inappropriate would experience.
It's fascinating as we go through these, right? Because on their own, each one is kind of like, oh, yeah, I've seen my grandmother do that, or my grandfather, or my uncle does those things. But when you kind of put it together, I guess as a puzzle, almost like this is, right? You kind of see how they can all come together. The last one in the article is abnormal perceptions and thoughts. People thinking that there's, someone going to harm them or steal their belongings, or, speaking to imaginary people. Can you speak to that one?
We think of these psychotic symptoms, and we tend to frame them in the context of a lifelong mental health condition like schizophrenia or something like that. But while these symptoms are core to mild behavioral impairment, they're actually relatively infrequent in advance of dementia. But when they emerge in advance of dementia, they are probably the strongest signal for cognitive decline in dementia. So they occur infrequently, but when you get them, it's a big deal. And these folks are often given diagnoses like delusional disorder or late onset schizophrenia. And what the data show, as well as my clinical experience, is they progress fairly quickly.
If we can talk prevention for a second, I'll throw this out to either one of you. As a guy who is over 50, 53.
You're that old?
I know what you're thinking. He doesn't look 53. But for a guy who's 53,
I wasn't thinking
you weren't thinking that?
No.
I didn't think so. What
I'm
should
older
I?
than you. I'm listening too.
All right. What should we be doing from a preventative perspective?
So first of all, overall general physical health is really important, and we want people to take care of themselves as best they can. But we can break this down more. And when I describe this to families after, say a diagnosis in clinic, I talk about prevention as one of the approaches to reduce inflammation, because that's when our body has chronic inflammation, it really starts to degenerate the body and the brain. So first and foremost is diet. And when when you look at the research literature about an aging brain, when you're looking at new diets to try help brain aging, the one they compare it to, the one that's terrible and bad for you, is called the Western diet. And so what we generally eat in our normal lives is just toxic to our bodies. And it's in part due to an overabundance of sugar and multiple different ways of putting sugar and naming them different things. And I don't mean real sugar as in an apple, because that's healthy and it's associated with all sorts of other nutrients. But we're talking about packaged, processed, refined sugars, and which are in packaged, processed, refined, ultra refined foods. So the more one can eat real food and less food from a package. So the produce, right? If you go to the periphery of the grocery store as opposed to the center aisles, you're going to do better. Now, your body also reacts to toxins. So, environmental contaminants, like pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, whatever. And those can contribute to inflammation as well. So for those who can, and it's really hard when it's expensive, but if people can eat organic, that might be something as well. And then just making sure you have bold and bright colored fruits, lots of deep green, kale and spinach, and nuts, things that reduce inflammation. The second component would be physical activity. And what we tell people, older adults, is they need 150 minutes a week, equally divided between cardio and strength training, because you don't want to lose muscle mass, because that's a marker of frailty, and that really predicts decline as well. So people want to use their bodies. And then, of course, number 3 is you want to use your brain. And that means being with other people. When you're in a social environment, you actually use your whole brain, and it's very pro-cognitive. Engaging in cognitive activities. And the flip side of that is when you see what Daniella studies is apathy, when people lose the drive to do those things that are good for their brain, and then it's worse.
I just learned yesterday, doctor, side note here, as somebody who suffers from sleep apnea, that can be a contributing factor to dementia. I did not know that.
Yeah, if you're not breathing at night, you're starving parts of your brain of oxygen, including the hippocampus, which is what helps you kind of sort memories and farm them out to different parts of your brain. And so it's really important that people manage all of their medical conditions, because the cerebrovascular, cardiovascular burden that people have really contributes to risk for cognitive decline and dementia.
It's interesting how much physical health is linked to brain health, right? I mean, the fact that you're just saying all the things you're saying, you could have been just telling me. You've been my dietitian, right? Make sure you eat colorful fruits and veggies and exercise a little bit. Scott's better in that department definitely than I am. So I'll try to listen to this podcast and try to do better. But it is fascinating to me, all the things we talked about. And I guess the question for me too is, so if I have a loved one 50 or over and I start to see a couple of these things, what's the benefit to me if we spot this earlier? The benefit to them, I mean, is there something that we can do to prolong the diagnosis, or to stretch out the time that they're diagnosed, or are there preventative things they can do if we spot this early enough?
Yeah, so I definitely think that if you start to spot these behaviors, it's probably best to go to a clinician, just to see if they can perform certain assessments and gauge where they might be. So somebody, might have normal cognition, they might have mild cognitive impairment, which is kind of like an intermediate between normal cognition and dementia. But it's important to know where you are, and potentially the underlying pathology that goes along with that diagnosis, because someone can have Alzheimer's disease but still have normal cognition. It's just that they might have such high cognitive reserves, so maybe they've built it over their lifetime through education, through exercise, and different regimens, and so it can be a bit masked. But it's really important to know that underlying pathology in order to be able to in order for the doctor to be able to prescribe medications. But I would just say, kind of to echo what Dr. Ismail said about, prevention. So a lot of those preventative factors can probably also be instilled even if the person is experiencing these behaviors. But also we can, if you're able to identify these behaviors, the doctor might also be able to provide intervention, like interventional, kind of like an interventional prescription, even if it's not pharmacological. So for example, if somebody has apathy, they may say, okay, maybe it's beneficial to join more group activities, things like that. And as well as maybe a pharmacological treatment. So those are kind of the benefits. If you are able to recognize those symptoms earlier, well, then you can use medications and potential other therapies before the symptoms start to get worse.
If someone sees changes in behavior or personality in a loved one, it's a warning sign either way. And it needs to be determined if these are, again, new and that they persist, or are they in response to some sort of environmental stressor or some medical condition, which is the second part of this, is that without a workup, then you don't know necessarily what's causing these symptoms. If you have a thyroid deficiency or vitamin B or B12 or a vitamin D deficiency or a subclinical infection of some sort, these can present with behavioral change, and all that needs to be ruled out. Then if we feel that there is something there, we have to kind of report the behavioral change in the context of where they are cognitively, because the risk differs depending on if they have normal cognition or if they have subjective complaints of cognition but test normally, or if they have impaired cognition in the mild cognitive impairment stage, because the risk varies. And so you have to really frame the behavior and the cognition together. Both are brain functions that can be changed with dementia. Thereafter, there can be further assessments. You can get more detailed cognitive testing, or it might be an indication to get a brain scan. But that's up to the clinician who knows the person and helps them with this workup. But at the same time, people can then refocus it and say, okay, what am I doing to optimize my brain aging, my brain health? And it's a time to rethink and just make sure we're doing all those things. If unfortunately it does turn out to be looking like a precursor to dementia, then advanced planning can happen. People can be aware and not caught off guard, which happens far too often. And then it comes to treatment, as Daniella said. We don't know if traditional psychiatric medications actually help with mild behavioral impairment. Those studies have yet to be done. But we do know that from the dementia, these newer dementia clinical trials, that in mild Alzheimer's disease, there can be, with the dementia medications, a reduction in the behavioral symptoms as well as improvement in cognition. The only way right now we have access to those disease-modifying therapies is through clinical trials. And there may be approvals coming up in the new year, but we'll see. But if there is risk, then engaging with kind of a specialist center to see if there are research options for this are important. But the big picture is to look forward and plan ahead. But you don't want kind of a false positive, right? You don't want someone to be all worried like they have dementia and then it's, or they're developing it and they don't. So that's why it's important. We really know that these symptoms are new onset in later life, that they persist, and there isn't another medical cause.
I appreciate that, Doctor. Sticking with the bigger picture that you mentioned, this is a huge issue, a huge dementia. I think the article Daniella wrote mentioned that by 2030, this will impact 1 million Canadians. And the other stat that blew my mind was that the people dealing with and caring for family members, friends, or neighbors spent 26 hours per week in 2020 assisting older Canadians living with dementia.
Wow. That
That is the equivalent to 235,000 full-time jobs, or $7.3 billion annually. When you put it that way, it's mind-blowing.
It is.
It's only going to get worse by 2050. Perhaps the case numbers could triple by then. What do we do as society, as government? What do we need to be paying attention to? Is there any things we should be doing to help prepare for this?
Yeah, so caregivers definitely represent a large part of, I think, this community, because as was mentioned in the stats, I know like my dad, for example, was the caregiver to my grandma, and there is a lot of time that is spent just, taking them to medical appointments and basically because somebody who with dementia is no longer necessarily functionally independent, it means that the tasks that they once were able to complete, they no longer can. So that might even include like bathing and feeding and things like that. So generally, when you consider that, all those duties, those statistics, they generally do reflect, what the amount of money, I guess, that it would take to cover a caregiver. And so in terms of like what caregivers can do, or how they can prepare, I think one of the major things is, once somebody does receive maybe an early diagnosis, one of the things that they can do in terms of planning is, potentially have their legal matters in order, so that once that does come up later, when the person is no longer able to actually answer to those things anymore because they cognitively can't, at least it's already taken care of. So there's certain things that with the parent or the friend or whomever has dementia, you can do way ahead of time so that things generally go smoother later in life. So that's just like one of the areas I think that can definitely go on. I think also just like in terms of like nursing home planning, as well as maybe if they don't want to go into a nursing home and they really do want to maintain their kind of individual autonomy, potentially maybe having your home or having them live with you, but ensuring that they do maybe have nurses and people to visit, I think is one of the things that people can also do to prepare for dementia diagnosis. I don't know if Dr. Ismail, if you have to contribute to that.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, the stress on caregivers is very real, and I see it all the time in clinic, and we always spend time with the family members to make sure that they are getting support, because sometimes they're forgotten. Canada has a national dementia strategy, and the third pillar of that strategy is to improve the quality of life for persons with dementia and their caregivers. And That includes the friend and family care partners that we're talking about. But there's a whole caregiving system that Daniella alluded to as well that involves home care, nurses, personal support workers, long-term care staff, etc., all of which are involved in the care of persons with dementia. And when it comes to those formal caregivers who work in dementia care, we have an employment crisis in a way. Recruitment and retention is poor. And if there are insufficient community resources, greater burden falls on the family care partners, and you get this vicious circle, and the end result is someone ends up in the emergency room or being placed in long-term care. So we're actually trying to study that in our Can Protect study, which is nationwide, and it's 100% online. It's a study of brain aging, and we have every province and territory represented. What people do in this study is they register, and we do validated neuropsychological testing, and then there are a whole host of questionnaires that people can answer annually that contribute to our understanding of both risk and resilience, protective factors to brain aging, within which we have detailed questionnaires. We have a caregiver sub-study, both for family friend care partners and also paid care staff, to try to determine where the stresses are. Are they at the level of the person with dementia and their symptoms? Is it their cognitive symptoms, or the behavioral symptoms? Is it functional symptoms? Is it at the level of the caregiver? Are they missing out on work? Are they not promoted because of being distracted? Are there unmet needs psychologically that they're not able to address because of providing care? Are there health system level issues? Are there not enough home care nurses? Do they not have enough access to additional supports or even, specialist care at the physician level, et cetera? We try to address all of that because then we can learn from that and feedback to the healthcare system, the Ministry of Health, the federal level, to develop policy on how we can improve, again, the quality of life for persons with dementia and their caregivers. And that's the Can Protect study.
I appreciate that, Doctor. We'll be sure to link to that in the write-up to the podcast that goes out. We'll link that. I know it was linked in Daniella's article. I guess we'll end with that, Daniella. I want to ask you about that. Have you had a lot of feedback from the article? Obviously, a lot of people read it. Were you expecting that many people to read it? What's the feedback been?
Yeah, so I was not expecting that many, the number of people to have read it that did. I was a bit shocked, but I tried to, as much as possible, do it in kind of like a language that a lot of academic journals just can't. They, when we're taught to write as a student or a graduate student, often we're taught to write in a language that is admirable for academia and not so much for people who are in the community to understand. And so I was really just focused on being able to translate that kind of language to language that everybody can understand, so that as a community we're able to identify people more easily. If we can't just send people papers and have them read it and be like, oh yeah, I can identify with that. It's really about kind of summarizing all this knowledge and being able to communicate it to a friend or parent, and hopefully that will make an impact and lessen dementia risk and improve prevention.
Well, we certainly appreciate you writing the piece and appreciate your time today. Daniella Vellone and Dr. Zainur Ismail from the University of Calgary. Thank you both very much. An insightful discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on another episode of Inside the Village. Hard to believe season 2 is winding down.
It is crazy.
It is crazy.
It is.
How many episodes now, Derek? Do you know?
65.
65.
Over 2 seasons.
Wow. And like 5 to 6 of those were really good.
It,
I love it because it just bugs you when I say that. That's
no,
why
it's You're not wrong.
You're
not really. You're not.
It's been great. It's been great.
It has been great. And what also will be great will be the year-ender. Probably two-parter again this year like we did last year.
Good. Well, probably because you're taking a month off again.
Look, when you get 12-week holidays, all right, it's not 12.
Oh, sorry.
Not even close to 12. Daniella Vellone, what a wonderful PhD candidate. What a great discussion with she and Dr. Ismail.
Yeah, if she's on the cusp of getting her PhD and there's any discussion about whether or not she should get it, I think it's pretty clear she knows what she's talking about.
Rubber stamped.
Yeah, and she's been on Inside the Village.
She's been on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself.
She might not even need a PhD because she has an ITV. See that?
Wow.
That's crazy.
On that note, I think we'll put a bow on this episode and pack up and head out. Inside the Village. .ca is where you can find back episodes of the show, and of course across the Village Media Network. Thanks for joining us today. For Derek Turner, executive producer of the show, Michael Friscalenti, editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.